Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Heritage Committee meeting for February 2nd, 2023. As we begin, I'll begin with the land acknowledgement. Excuse me. The Niagara region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Haudenosaunee, Ronk, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Regional Municipality of Niagara and the Town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Our first item is disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest? Seeing none, we can move to accepting the approval of the agenda. I need a mover and a seconder for the approval of the agenda. Moved by Member Riley and seconded by Councillor Kristanji. Resolved that the agenda for February 2nd, 2023 Heritage Advisory Committee meeting be approved. All in favor? It's carried. It's easy, everybody's to my right. The only problem is I teach to my left. So like when I'm in front of a classroom, I always look this way first, so I have to make a conscious effort to. Next, we have a resolution that the Heritage Grimsby Advisory Committee minutes of January 10th, 2023 be approved. Are there any questions or comments on those minutes? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder, please. Member Nixon, seconded by Councillor Kristanji. Resolved that the Heritage Grimsby Advisory Committee minutes of January 10th, 2023 be approved. All in favor? That's carried. That pen doesn't work. This one looks like a good one. Okay. We have a verbal update. Our first agenda item is a verbal update regarding the Grimsby Beach study. Ms. Vrecchia?
Good evening. Thank you, through you, the chair. So I will quickly give you an update on the study. So the town received the decision from the Ontario Land Tribunal regarding the appeal to the Grimsby Beach secondary plan and the related zoning amendment. The decision indicated that a withdrawal of appeals for the official plan and zoning amendments for the entire area other than 33 Victoria Terrace. This effectively lifts the interim control bylaw for the entire area other than 33 Victoria Terrace. A report was prepared for the Committee of the Whole on January 16th. So if you'd like to see that report, you can reference the Committee of the Whole agenda that was prepared by staff. The hearing for the remaining appeal will be set for October 2nd, 2023. And again, to note that the interim control bylaw has now been lifted and planning can now consider planning and building inquiries and applications and ensure they are consistent with the new policies and regulations, which includes the urban design and heritage guidelines. That's my update, if anyone has any questions.
Are there any questions for Ms. Vrecchia? Seeing none, thank you. I have a motion. I need a mover and a seconder, please. We've got Nixon and Riley. Jesus. My kingdom for a pen. Sorry. Seriously. All in favor of receiving the verbal update? It's carried. Thank you. Next, we have a memorandum. Item 7.1, updates to the Heritage Grimsby Advisory Committee terms of reference. Ms. Vrecchia?
Thank you, through you, the chair. So the purpose of the memorandum that was provided was to bring the updates to the committee's attention with respect to the proposed changes to the committee's terms of reference and the associated bylaw. The terms of reference and bylaw were amended to come into conformity with the new legislative changes in the Ontario Heritage Act, which was introduced through Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act. And in addition, the committee's terms of reference was further amended as part of a town-wide initiative to bring all committees of council into alignment. The amended terms of reference and the associated bylaw was attached within the memorandum for the committee's reference. And in summary, it is recommended that the terms of reference and bylaw be amended to come into conformity with the new legislative changes and further to ensure town-wide alignment with the committees of council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vrecchia. Any questions about the terms of reference? Seeing none, I have a motion to accept that report. I need a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Korstanji, seconded by Member Nixon. Resolved that the terms of reference and bylaw be amended to come into conformity with the new legislative changes and ensure townwide alignment with all committees of council. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next, we have item 7.2, Municipal Heritage Register Inclusion. Mr. France Wiley.
Thank you, through you, the chair. The property at 9 Elm Street has been identified as having potential cultural heritage value or interest as defined by the Ministry of Culture under Ontario Regulation 56922. To be listed on the register after the passing of Bill 23, properties can only be added if they meet 2 or more of the criteria. Staff utilized the Ontario Regulation 56922 and found that the property has met at least 6 of the 9 prescribed criteria. The property meets the criteria for design and physical value because the dwelling at 9 Elm Street is a good representation of the 1910s-20s style of late Edwardian craftsman architecture built in the 4-square footprint that can be found across Ontario. The Edwardian influence at 9 Elm Street can be seen in the 2.5-story square design, the hipped roof, symmetrical groupings of windows, and the front-facing dormer. The dwelling at 9 Elm Street demonstrates a high degree of technical achievement and serves as an excellent example of an intact Wardway kit home from the turn of the 20th century. The property meets the criteria for historical and associative value because the dwelling at 9 Elm Street contributes to the understanding of the development of the downtown core. This historic dwelling contributes to the collection of homes historically found along the Elm Street corridor. The property at 9 Elm has direct associations with the H.H. Farrell and A. Hewson Basket Factory. The Basket Factory was an integral part of the successful tender fruit farming industry. 9 Elm Street abuts the former factory site and was owned by Farrell and Sons in the early 1900s. The property meets the criteria for contextual value because the dwelling at 9 Elm Street is representative of the age and architectural style that was historically found throughout the neighborhood and historic Main Street corridors. The historic dwelling at 9 Elm Street is physically, functionally, and historically linked to its surroundings. The close proximity to the Farrell and Sons Basket Factory and its use as supportive housing for the factory and the proximity to Forty Creek have been noted as defining features. In summary, the property at 9 Elm has been identified as having cultural heritage significance as defined by the Ministry of Culture and Tourism under Regulation 56922. Staff have found that the property meets at least 6 of the 9 prescribed criteria, and it is therefore recommended that the property at 9 Elm Street be included on the Municipal Heritage Register. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Member Riley?
In the memo, the second paragraph notes the property meets at least 5 of 9, and then later on it says 6 of 9. I thought it did. Oh, sorry. Through the chair. Second paragraph of the memo in the agenda notes the property meets 5 of 9 prescribed criteria, and then later it's 6 of 9, and then in the report it's 6 of 9. So I just wanted to clarify if we need to amend that, as I assume it's 6 of 9.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, it's 6 out of 9 criteria. And that'll be corrected. This is the draft version, and we'll have the final version shortly.
Thank you.
Yes. The other question I have, I know it's notes in there that we don't need to notify the homeowners of the intent to include, but out of curiosity, has there been any consultation? Are they aware of it? And if they are aware, is there any objection or, yeah.
Ms. Vecchia?
Thank you, through you, the chair. There has been ongoing discussions with the property owners, and we are working together to move forward to the protection of the building. So this is us executing that agreement that we have.
Thank you. That was my question, too. Any other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none. I have a motion that the properties at 9 Elm Street be listed on the Municipal Heritage Register. I need a mover and a seconder, please. Member Riley, seconded by Member Nixon. All right. Resolved that the properties at 9 Elm Street be listed on the Town of Grimsby Municipal Heritage Register. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next, we have a designation research report. Item 8.1 for 99 Main Street West. Mr. France Wiley.
Thank you, through you, the chair. First, we would like to extend a special thank you to Wayne and the team at the Grimsby Historical Society, as well as other community members, for their contribution towards the preservation of the town's heritage as we face the impacts of Bill 23 together. Staff recommend that the property at 99 Main Street West be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff have concluded that the property has met 6 out of the 9 prescribed criteria of the Ontario Regulation 56922. The property meets the criteria for design and physical value because the Seamstress Cottage is an excellent example of a Loyalist stone structure built of local Grimsby sandstone. The masonry work can be found at Nell's Manor, and St. Andrew's Church has many similarities to the masonry work of 99 Main Street West. The house was built in the Loyalist style. The term came from the array of architectural styles that the first settlers to arrive at the 40 brought with them from their native countries. The low-pitched roof, stone construction, and fortified stone walls were common practices in European countries and are elements that we see on 99 Main Street West. The property meets the criteria for historical and associative value because the house at 99 Main Street West has direct associations with the development of the village of Grimsby during the 18th and 19th centuries. Robert Nels had George Ball survey the property in 1840. Robert then had the dwelling at 99 Main Street West built for his daughter, Marianne Nels, who was a widow returning to the 40 after living in Brantford. Mary returned to the 40 after the death of her husband and moved into the newly constructed cottage to be the full-time seamstress for the family. The property meets the criteria for contextual value because the building at 99 Main Street West has a strong historical and physical connection to its surroundings. The dwelling is a landmark building on the east side of Main Street West and has been known as the Seamstress Cottage to local residents for some time. The house is compatible with the surrounding structures. Many of the houses on this section of Main Street West were built to take advantage of the sloping grade towards 40 Mile Creek. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest and significant findings, staff recommend that the property at 99 Main Street West be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And I just want to note that this afternoon we received additional information about the Nels descendants and Bingle family that will be reflected in the associative values of the final report, and we look forward to incorporating this information into the 56922 once we receive supporting documents. Thank you.
Thank you. So you've already answered one of my questions because I was going to ask if that was going to be added. Questions from members of the committee or comments? Member Riley?
On. Through you, Chair. Are the homeowners aware of the intent to designate this? And if so, is there agreement on it or any objection to it?
Ms. Vecchia?
Thank you, through the chair. I have talked to the property owner quite extensively. She is open to the designation, and she's aware that it was coming tonight. She wasn't able to make the meeting, but I'll be connecting with her tomorrow to let her know how it goes. But she definitely is aware of what's happening, and she understands what's happening with Bill 23, and she knows the significance of the building. So we're definitely working together on this, so.
Other questions?
Through you, Chair. Any anticipated repairs to the home? Is there anything evident that it's need any work to bring it up to any standard?
Ms. Recchia?
Yeah, so I have spoken with the homeowner. I know she has, some concerns with the windows and things like that. So we are setting up some time for myself and Mr. France Wiley to go and assess the site. And our hopes is to put together a conservation management plan for her so that we can assess what needs to be done, but put it over time so she's not as burdened by it. And then we do have some grant options that we're also talking to her about. But she has had significant work done. I know she's restored the foundations. So she's done a lot of work. It sounds like she needs some help when it comes to the windows next. So the roof has been recently done, so she's done a lot of work on it. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Nixon?
Thank you. I do have a question. It's more of a curiosity, but the dwelling's called the dressmaker's cottage sometimes, and then also the seamstress's cottage. I was just looking for clarification. Is this used interchangeably? What are the sources around this? And are you hoping to use those names, like if this does go through as a designation, will that be one of those names will be chosen? Just out of curiosity. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Ms. Recchia?
Thank you, through the chair. We've been working with the Grimsby Historical Society, so I would like to get them to weigh on it as well, but we'll definitely bring the plaques, if this does move forward, to the committee, and you'll have a chance to look at the date and the name of the dressmaker and the shop, or the dwelling, but I also like to have the property owner weigh in, so I think we can definitely come to an agreement on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just as a personal aside, I love when these come forward because it makes you re-examine something that you've driven by 1,000 times and kind of take it for granted. And then, so your report, the history of it, kind of opens up your eyes again about the history. And so I thank you, because it's always great to have these things come forward, besides the fact that we're preserving it, but just to remember where it came from. So I do have a motion. I need a mover and a seconder to accept the report. Councillor Cristangi, and seconded by Member Nixon. Resolved that 99 Main Street West be designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that a notice of intention to designate be issued in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Next, we have 8.2, Designation Research Report regarding 292 Main Street West. Mr. France Wiley.
Thank you, through the chair. Staff recommend that the property at 292 Main Street West be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff have concluded that the property has met 8 out of the 9 prescribed criteria of the Ontario Regulation 56922. The property meets the criteria for design and physical value because the historic dwelling at 292 Main Street West is a strong representation of Edwardian classicism. The style is a reaction to the highly decorated interiors and exteriors of the Victorian era. Edwardian classicism is defined by symmetrical simplified facades with classical influences, tall gable roofs, smooth red brick, oak interiors, and multi-pane divided windows. The historic structure at 292 Main Street West contains all of these attributes, as well as a full-width 2-story porch with square columns supported by cut stone bases. The historic dwelling and auxiliary buildings demonstrate a high degree of technical and scientific achievement. The Gothic arch barn roof was a technical advancement in barn building. The innovative design improved the use of the upper spaces in the barn by removing the need for interior wood support posts, as well as using smaller pieces of lumber which were laminated together to create a larger truss. By the turn of the century, the large timbers needed to construct barns were already becoming scarce, and a Gothic arch was a new alternative. The property meets the criteria for historical and associative value because the property at 292 Main Street West is associated with the Pettit and Metcalf families, both of which were influential in the development of Grimsby and Upper Canada. The property at 292 Main Street West is an intact parcel that was once a part of the original land grant given to Andrew Pettit from the Crown in 1787. The land remained with the Pettit family until this parcel was sold to the Metcalfs in 1897. The Pettits were one of the first families to settle at the 40 and were influential in establishing St. Andrew's Church. The Metcalfs built the Edwardian Classicism residence known as Swallowbeck II at 292 Main Street West. The Metcalf family had been fruit farming the property successfully, which directly contributed to the success of the town. Emma Clark Metcalf was the daughter of Charles Clark of Elora. Charles was a Canadian politician and a Speaker of the Legislature of Ontario in 1880 to 1883, and served as a Liberal MLA for Wellington Centre from 1871 to 1886, and for Wellington East from 1886 to 1891. The property meets the criteria for contextual value because the historic dwelling at 292 Main Street West, known as Swallowbeck II, is representative of the age and architectural style that was historically found throughout the neighborhood and the historic Main Street corridor. The surviving examples of fruit-growing farms along Main Street West and East were built between the 1860s and into the 1920s. 292 Main Street West is very compatible with its surrounding building stock, having been constructed in 1909. The auxiliary buildings at 292 Main Street West are representative of the surrounding fruit farming industry. The concrete block buildings help illustrate how the landscape surrounding the property at 292 Main Street West has changed from orchards to a modern subdivision. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value and interest, staff have recommended that the property at 292 Main Street West be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions about the report? Member Riley?
Through you, Chair. Just I know there's a note about the exact age of the building is unknown. I think there's one number that references 1897 as with the owners of it, but then the town has it as 1909. Is that normal to have such a discrepancy in ownership versus records?
Mr. France Wiley?
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, so the date, 1897, I believe that's when they took ownership of the property. The 1909 date, we were able to find it on some old property abstracts, so we're pretty positive about that being the build date. And it lines up with the architectural styles as well of the house. Thank you.
Member Riley?
Through you, Chair. This property, I think we talked about it a couple of meetings ago. There was, I think it was a motion to, or I forget what it was, simply to sever off the land. The owners are aware, I trust, that there's a designation in place, and I'm just curious to know if they're supportive of it, if they're objecting to it. Can you provide any insights?
Ms. Vecchia?
Thank you, through the chair. So staff's recommendation, since the application for the minor variance and consents on the site, was that the property did meet the criteria and that we'd be recommending designation. This was also echoed by the author of the Heritage Impact Assessment. The recommendations from staff and the conditional approval from the Land Division Committee and the Committee of Adjustment was appealed. So that process will be dealt with through our legal team, so, yeah.
Any other questions? So my question is regarding the appeal process. Does the designation, I mean, the importance of this was already mentioned in the report that came forward at the severance hearing. Does the designation impact that, the future of the process at all?
Through you, the chair. So the staff recommendation, I can briefly go over. So they had applied for 2 consents. One consent was for a house in front of the Heritage Building, and then the second consent was at the back, and that was to have the auxiliary buildings be on a separate site. Staff was not supportive of a consent in the front yard due to the visual impacts to the heritage resource, but we were supportive of the rear as long as the property was designated and included the auxiliary buildings, because the visual relationship between the house and the outbuildings wouldn't have changed. But we just felt that we wanted to ensure that the resources were safe. So that's the staff's recommendation that went forward. I don't know if Walter wants
Sorry,
to-
I'm really poorly worded my question, I think. I was aware of all that. Thank you for the refresher. My question was more along the lines of does a designation now impact the application, the process as it goes forward? Because a non-designated property, I think, would be dealt with a little differently than a designated property when it comes to the next stages. So do you have any, is there any, it might be an unknown, so if it's unknown, then that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Specifically, a designation prior to the division of the land creates a technical issue whereby a new bylaw would have to be passed at some later date, which recognizes the new legal description or legal descriptions of the property, depending on how the land is divided. Secondly, in terms of the other potential impact in terms of the land use appeal, that's and consent appeal that's been lodged, if council approves the designation, the applicants have the ability to appeal that, and there could potentially be, if they do appeal it, there potentially be a consolidated hearing for both appeals, similar to what we've had with other similar applications on Main Street East specifically.
Thank you. Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder to accept the report. Member Riley, seconded by Member Nixon. Resolved that 292 Main Street West be designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that a notice of intention to designate be issued in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act. All in favor? That's carried. Next, we have item 8.3, Designation Research Report regarding 13 Mountain Street. Ms. Verrecchia.
Thank you. Through you, the chair. Staff recommend that the property at 13 Mountain Street be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff have concluded that the property has met 5 out of the 9 prescribed criteria of Ontario Regulation 56922. The property meets the criteria for design and physical value because 13 Mountain Street is a strong example of Gothic revival architecture from the late 1800s. The house was built with red clay bricks produced locally. The brick building features many high-pitched gable roofs with intersecting dormers and roof lines. The center of the roof is flat and has a widow's walk with a wooden railing. The home has had some early alterations, such as an addition of a sun porch, which is enclosed with wooden encasement windows, and the expansion of the house to the east. The property meets the criteria for historical and associative value because 13 Mountain Street has direct associations with citizens and organizations that are significant to the community. The house is the original location of the first grout foundry and agricultural works, which unfortunately burnt down in 1879. A year later, in 1880, Dr. Theron Wolverton built the residence at 13 Mountain Street. As a Wolverton family home where he lived lived with his wife Olivia Nels and their 2 children. Dr. Theron Wolverton, son of Dr. Theron Wolverton, son of Jonathan Wolverton, who was one of the pioneer physicians of the district. And he was also the brother of one of the most widely known and highly respected fruitmen of Canada, Edgar Judson Wolverton. The property meets the criteria for contextual value because the property is important in defining, maintaining, and supporting the character of an area. The house is a notable building in the immediate downtown area. The property has many viewpoints throughout the downtown. This downtown area of Grimsby is one of the oldest portions of the town and retains as a considerable amount of the original building stock from the 18 and 1900s. The property has been used as a commercial space for many businesses since the 1960s. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest, staff have recommended that the property at 13 Mountain Street be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Verrecchia? Member Riley?
Through you, Chair. It's 2013 is the most recent ownership. It's the same owner since 2013.
Ms. Verrecchia?
Through you, the chair. There has been a change in ownership that was more recent. I'm not exactly sure the name of, I don't know if Walter knows the exact name, but I know there has been a change of ownership, and there's also, there was an application for the site from the current owners, and that's currently appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Mr. Riley?
The occupants of this, is it a single business? I just noticed from the sign outside, do we know, is there multiple businesses in there?
Ms. Verrecchia?
Through you, the chair, I'm not exactly sure. I would have to confirm that. There could potentially be 2, I think, but I'm not 100% sure.
Any other questions? My question was just about the accessory building. There's the accessory building in the back there. I don't know if that was evaluated, if there's any reason for preserving that building, the age of the building. Do you have any information on that building?
Through you, the chair, this building was assessed during the application, and we had an Ontario Regulation 906, which has now been updated to 56922, conducted for the site, and it didn't meet the criteria. And it had a very low integrity, very heavily modified, but we did recommend that the building be documented, and that measured drawings be produced of the site, and then photos be taken within its landscape so that we would have a record of what that looked like. So that's how we had assessed it at that time, but if the designation was to move forward, the demolition would still need to be removed, be approved by council for that structure.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Costangi?
Through you, Chair. So you mentioned that the bricks were made locally. Do we know if they were from the Grimsby Brick Factory or another source?
Through you, the chair. Typically, they were produced locally for a building of this age. I can't confirm 100% if they were from there, but that's something we can definitely look into. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I need a mover and a seconder to accept the report. Councillor Costangi moved, seconded by Member Nixon. I have a motion resolved that 13 Mountain Street be designated under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that a notice of intention to designate be issued in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act. All in favor? That's carried. Next, we have a designation report regarding 19 Elm Street, and that is Ms. Verrecchia again.
Thank you, through you, the chair. Staff recommend that the property at 19 Elm Street be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Staff have concluded that the property has met 5 out of the 9 prescribed criteria of the Ontario Regulation 56922. The property meets the criteria for design and physical value because 19 Elm Street was constructed in 1880, built with structural masonry construction. The Gothic building is one of the only patterned brick buildings within Grimsby. The exterior utilizes red and buff brick, which was placed on the facade to highlight features and enhance the Gothic designs. The original wood windows can be found throughout the exterior of 19 Elm Street. The styles of the windows include a rose window in the top center gable, which is above double lancet arch windows with quadrifoil openings in the center. Lancet arch windows can also be found on the nave of the church, and colored stained glass sash windows throughout. The property meets the criteria for historical and associative value because the historic church founded at 19 Elm Street was built by Charles Wolverton and was a central gathering point for the Baptist community in 1880. Charles Wolverton was the son of Dennis Wolverton, reformer in politics and member of the Upper Canada's Legislative Assembly from 1834 to 1836. Father of Lioness Wolverton, a successful journalist as well as a farmer and fruit innovator with many honorable achievements and appointments. The property meets the criteria for contextual value because the property is important in defining, maintaining, and supporting the character of the downtown area. The structure is located on a prominent corner in the downtown. The building is compatible with the surrounding structures, a majority of them being built in the late 1800s. The church is adjacent to other designated properties. Based on the assessment of cultural heritage value or interest, staff have recommended that the property at 19 Elm Street be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verrecchia. Any questions for Ms. Verrecchia? Member Nixon?
Thank you, through you, the chair. Just confirming, is the addition included in this designation recommendation or not?
Ms. Verrecchia?
Through you, the chair. So similar to the other accessory building at 13 Mountain, all buildings and structures are require council approval to be demolished. This would include the addition on the church. So typically what happens is the designation bylaw will have listed attributes which help strengthen the protection of those attributes, but demolition of any designated building or any structures on a designated site do require approval. So they'll be assessed again before they come down.
Thank you, Ms. Verrecchia. Any other questions for Ms. Verrecchia? Member Riley?
Through the chair, where's my question? Is the building in good repair? Any work that's going to be required on it?
Ms. Verrecchia?
Thank you, through you, the chair. So I believe they've done a lot of interior restoration work on the church, but the masonry on the outside does need a lot of attention. That was one of the things we also addressed within our staff recommendation for the original application, was that the masonry be restored. So there's a lot of salt staining, harsh concrete mortars been used on the structure over the years. So you're seeing a lot of evidence of that. So it will definitely need a lot of restoration work, but that was echoed within our recommendation, so, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Member Riley?
Through you, Chair. You mentioned there's been some repairs that have been done to it, and you mentioned concrete. Have the repairs that have been done been in line with the materials that should have been used, or is there going to be some work that has to be redone with the materials that should have been used for a heritage property?
Ms. Verrecchia?
Through you, the chair. So over time, harsh mortars have been incorporated. Heritage buildings should have lime-based mortars, but there's strong evidence that repairs were done with concrete. And because the brick is softer than the concrete, the brick's breaking first. So that's essentially what's happening. And the concrete doesn't allow the masonry to dry. So it's basically slowly disintegrating. So those will have to be replaced with compatible characteristics similar to the other brick on the building, and then they'll be paired with a lime-based mortar.
Thank you. Any other questions? Member Nixon?
Thank you, through you, the chair. I know that during that application process, the owners were aware that we would be eventually having this recommendation for, or at least the study for to recommend designation. Are we still in conversation with those folks?
Ms. Vecchia?
Thank you, through you, the chair. Yes, so it's similar to what Walter was saying about 292. So they do still have the ability to object to the designation, but yeah, we will be having these conversations with them and hoping to work together.
Any further questions or comments? I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Member Riley, seconded by Councillor Kristanji. Resolved that 19 Elm Street be designated under Part 4 of Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that a notice of intention to designate be issued in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act. All in favor? That's carried. So the new agenda item is a resolution that I drafted today. I don't know if people, do you have it so we can put it up, or? So we've had considerable discussion at council and at this committee about the impact of Bill 23 on our ability to work as a heritage committee and the town's ability to preserve our heritage resources. So while we don't have the power to draft legislation that changes these things, we can voice our opinion and make it clear, and I think it's important that we make it clear what our opinion is on Bill 23, and especially from a Heritage Committee standpoint, I wanted to bring it here so that you had a chance to reflect on it if there were changes you thought needed to be made. And I'm sorry for not getting it to you sooner. It came to me last night that we should be doing this because I was going to bring it to council, but I wanted to bring it to you first so that you could see it. My biggest concern about Bill 23, and I think the concern that staff has brought forward repeatedly, is that the listing of houses on the Heritage Register was one of our ways of kind of putting a bookmark on properties that had heritage value but hadn't been designated yet, where the intent to designate eventually, so for example, the 4 properties that we had on the agenda tonight, I know 3 for sure, I'm assuming all 4 were on the list. The intent of the list is to say, we're going to come back to this when we need to, or if we need to, and so that staff isn't overwhelmed by constantly having to prepare these designation reports. I'm happy that we were able to add 4 designated properties tonight, but I'm frightened by the consequence of Bill 23, and Ms. Vecchia was kind enough to send me an article which I'd already read. There are multiple articles that you can read, but I think it was 33,000? How many? 31,000 properties in the province of Ontario are at risk, have been added to the in danger list by, is it the National Trust? So, you know, that list used to be made up of very significant properties, like properties that were, you know, hey, pay attention to this because this might be torn down. And the fact that 31,000 properties have been added to that list is horrendous, for lack of a better word. You know, it goes against everything that we've tried to preserve within the town of Grimsby, that we've tried to protect. We've done our best to keep these properties intact and to create policies that protected them in the long run, and that allowed us to review them when the time came. And so this is just, in my opinion, us voicing our displeasure to the province and letting them know that it's not too late to change the legislation. They've made other changes. I think that the intent of what they're trying to do, and that's the elimination of red tape, whether it works or not, I don't know. But I think what's going to happen, and what I honestly believe will begin to happen throughout the province, is this mass designation. It's going to be overwhelming for staff to do this, but properties that might be designated that had no business being designated, I don't know what the consequence is going to be. But I know that I was happy with the way it was, and so that's what the resolution's for tonight. So I'll read it out, and if people have any questions on it, any things that they feel need to be changed, I've already, thank you for staff's input on it. I appreciate your feedback on it already, and we've already made some minor changes. So it's, whereas the Municipal Heritage Register is an important tool for the preservation and protection of cultural heritage properties within the town of Grimsby and throughout the province of Ontario. Whereas cultural heritage properties are those which have potential cultural heritage value or interest, but have yet to be formally evaluated as per the process prescribed in the Ontario Heritage Act. And whereas listed properties are labeled as such as they are listed in the town of Grimsby's Municipal Heritage Register, which identifies all municipally recognized cultural heritage resources. And whereas the Municipal Heritage Register allows municipalities to regulate demolition on properties protected under Section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act, ensuring that their cultural heritage value is preserved for future generations. Whereas listing a property, and I'm sorry how wordy this is, but I wanted to include all the important things I thought were necessary. Whereas listing a property on the Municipal Heritage Register recognizes a property's cultural heritage value and is generally less complex, time-consuming, and economically burdensome to local municipalities in pursuing the designation of a property as outlined within the existing process, which requires extensive research and documentation. And whereas the listing of properties on the Municipal Heritage Register provides a measure of protection, ensuring that these properties cannot be demolished without approval of the municipality. Whereas it is important to list properties of cultural heritage value of interest, including those that are not currently designated, in order to ensure their preservation for future generations. Whereas the 60-day demolition provision in the Ontario Heritage Act provides a short time frame for a municipality to consider the heritage value of a property before it may be demolished. Whereas the new requirement of the Ontario Heritage Act mandates the assessment of an unreasonable amount of resources for a local municipality within a 2-year timeline. Whereas the new requirement of removal after the 2-year anniversary leaves resources exposed and unprotected for up to 5 years. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Grimsby addresses this resolution to the government of the province of Ontario, affirming the importance of the Municipal Heritage Register and its role in preserving the cultural heritage of municipalities throughout the province. Be it further resolved that this Council of the Town of Grimsby encourages the government of the province of Ontario to make changes to Bill 23, which promote the retention and expansion of the Municipal Heritage Register, including the listing of properties of cultural heritage value or interest that are not currently designated. Be it further resolved that this Council of the Town of Grimsby encourages the government of the province of Ontario to change Bill 23 to protect the 60-day demolition provision indefinitely rather than for a maximum of 2 years in order to provide adequate time for the municipality to consider the heritage value of properties before they may be demolished. Be it further resolved that this Council of the Town of Grimsby circulate this notice of motion to municipalities of Ontario for endorsement and circulation to the province. So that's a lot, and I apologize that you didn't I read it to you because you didn't get it until this afternoon, and I didn't want to assume that you had the time in the hour since you got it to read it. Are there any comments, any questions on that? Sorry.
Just as per the procedure bylaw, we can't actually comment.
Oh, we can't comment on the notice of motion, sorry. So I guess that's pointless then, sorry, I thought that the purpose was a discussion. It's not a notice of motion until it goes to council, right? My intention was it for it to be a draft for the committee to discuss and revise, so I don't know how that works within the, because it's not a notice of motion until it goes to council, right? Or is it?
We still follow
Okay.
the procedure bylaw and the committee.
Okay. All right, so if there are any changes that you'd like to make to this, since we can't discuss it here, and I apologize, I meant it as a draft that we could revise as a group. Otherwise, I would have just brought it to council. So my intent was not to just overwhelm you with this, and so if that's what happened, I apologize. But if there are changes that you think, even if it's just a minor thing, like use this word instead of that one, send it to me, and I'll revise it, and I'll send it to the clerk as soon as possible so that we can bring it forward. All right. Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder to, well, if you...
Yeah, no, you're right. Never mind.
Yeah, so, yeah, well, would we endorse that or not? Does the committee feel like you can endorse it the way that it is? Or if you're not comfortable with that, I understand. So, Member Riley.
To you, Chair. So we can't, I'm confused. We can't discuss it, but we...
Do you want to, Mr. Chica, maybe you can clarify?
Through the chair, sorry. When the motion came through this afternoon, I perceived it to be a notice of motion. And through the procedures here, we can't, because the Heritage Advisory Committee follows the town's procedural bylaw through council. A notice of motion is actually discussed at the following meeting. So you can bring it forward at a meeting, just to let you know that this is coming forward. And then it's to be discussed and debated or anything at the next meeting, at the following meeting of Heritage.
Okay, so just to be clear, sorry, go ahead.
Through the chair, we could recommend moving it into new business instead and not as a specific notice of motion.
Okay. If we could do that, so do we need a mover and a seconder to move it to new business, or I can write it up. I can read you my email, and it was, the intent was to bring it forward for committee members so I didn't realize I was making it that formal. I want to bring it forward as a notice of motion to council. So I figured if we discussed it here, because I trust your opinion and I wanted to include your opinion in that notice of motion. So we'll discuss it as new business, and then if we want to bring it forward as something that the committee endorses, then we can do that afterwards. So questions or comments on the proposal? Member Riley.
Through you, Chair. Overall, I think it's a great idea to bring this forward. The third to last paragraph, I think we need to reword that because, so it says make changes to Bill 23. Bill 23 is passed. It's now in legislation. It's in force. So I think we want to say is changes to the Heritage Act or regulation.
So I've got Walter nodding his head in agreement, so.
Chair, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there any significance in the timing that this is put forward to the province? Since the bill has already been passed? Like if it's a month or a month and a half, does it make that much difference?
I'd like to do it as soon as possible, just because we have a lot of, as you know, we have numerous applications before us that involve heritage properties. We have numerous properties at risk, and frankly, if the change were to occur sooner than later, it would save staff an awful lot of hours having to begin the process. I mean, my hope is that they'll make a change to it. I don't know that it'll happen or not, but I think if enough municipalities get together and express their discontent about it, that change will occur, and it'll prevent all of these municipalities from having to go through the process that we're in fear of having to go through. So I'd like to do it as quickly as possible, just because I think that we have 2 years for the entire process, backdated, I believe, to December, isn't it? So we're already 2 months in to the 2 years. So the clock has already begun. That's the only reason I want to get it done as quickly as possible. I should have done it earlier. So my apologies for not having done it earlier. We didn't have a Heritage Committee, in my defense. So okay, so just to go back, Mr. Basic has agreed that the third from last paragraph, Mr. Riley pointed out the fact that because the bill is already passed, it should be changes to the Ontario Heritage Act, not to Bill 23. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other, Mr. Riley?
Through the chair, and it also, I just noticed it's in the second to last paragraph as well as reference to Bill 23, so I think we should update those ones. The other, I guess, two things that I'll throw in here. So not that I don't agree with this, but I think the fact that it was presented as a bill to amend the act around the whole 60-day, the 2 years to 5 years piece that we're talking about here, I wonder if rather than just asking them to remove that altogether, we suggest maybe a bit of a compromise and have it be on any new properties. And reason behind that, I think we probably, had we known years ago when these were added to the register, we may have not added to them knowing that the change now affects those ones. I think it might be a bit of a long shot to get them to completely remove that provision, so offering it to be a provision that affects all properties going forward, because then we can make different decisions with what we try to add to the register, knowing that we've got a 2-year limit and then there's going to be a 5-year period after that. So just a suggested amendment to that one, considering that that was already introduced by the in that Bill 23.
I understand your perspective. My belief is that the entire change to the Ontario Heritage Act was a mistake and that it should be rescinded, and that was the intent of the wording by me. I think it was working very well the way that it was written. Over the years, I was on the Heritage Committee for 15 years before I lost the last election, and over those years, we've had properties come forward where they were on our list, or we added them to the list because we were in fear of possible demolition. And we've had properties where we designated them, and we've also had properties we looked at and said, there have been so many changes made over the years that it's not worth preserving. The list was a great way for us to balance that. The balance was already there. So I get what you're saying, but I really believe that the balance was already there in the process before. I can give you an example on Main Street West, right next door to the property that we were talking about today, 292 Main Street West. There was a heritage home that we looked at for designation, and it had been changed so much over the years, and so many changes have been made and staff went there and looked at it and said, it's not worth preserving. So we allowed for the demolition of it, and in that process, they also built the new homes that are there in the style of the homes that was torn down. In other cases, we've had houses where the house needed to be preserved and it was clearly missed in the register, and we've added it along the way. So I think it's worked out great, and that's why I wrote it. What I would prefer to say is, hey, you made a mistake, just get rid of it. But I wanted to explain why I felt they made a mistake. And so I appreciate what you're saying 100%. And if compromise was one, I'm fine with compromise too. And if they make a change that makes it somewhere in the middle where we can preserve these properties, still have a list, and then, maybe shorten up the timeframes or make us do a little bit, jump through a few more hoops to put the houses on that list, that's fine. But I can tell you that when we created that list and Mr. Basic was there, we were in that room, or actually it was the old room, at the old town hall until like midnight, several nights in a row, going through every property as if it was going to be designated, should it be on the register and why is it there? We didn't have all the historical reports that you'd have. We had basic reports about the age of the home and things like that. But we took that list seriously when we created it. And perhaps there are municipalities that didn't throughout the province of Ontario, but our staff spent dozens and dozens of hours creating the original proposal, and then we spent just as much time going through each of those properties and saying why it should be on that list. And we've added to it throughout the year. So I'm happy with it the way that it was. I think that there are still houses that we've probably missed. You know, they might be set back from the road, because when we were doing it, the way that we did it was everybody kind of took neighborhoods and we drove all over town and we said, this one's not on there, that one's not on there, that one's not on there. And we looked at barns and we looked at other things, and we tried to catch everything, but you don't catch everything. And so I'm sure that there are properties in Grimsby that aren't on this list that we should put on there. And the purpose of the list is that if somebody came forward and said, hey, you missed this one, we can put it on there without having to designate it. So anyway, that's a long way of answering your question, so I apologize. If you could still disagree with me. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Okay, so what we're going to do. Do you want to explain it? Councillor Cristangi?
So I agree with this and I like it. I do think, though, what it misses is the national heritage that we actually have. A lot of municipalities have heritage, with the buildings and stuff like that. But what we have here is really important national heritage to the history of Canada with the War of 1812 and things like that. And as we are learning our diversity in culture and heritage, there are properties that we are just learning have Indigenous heritage and African American heritage, and we're still discovering those. And with Bill 23, I'm afraid that we may lose things that we haven't learned yet. So I would like to maybe add something like that in there, of the dangers of losing different national heritage, but also to circulate it on a higher level to federally, because it is such important heritage that we have.
Yeah, and that excellent point, and that's one of the points that was made in the I think it was the National Trust. One of the first articles that were written talked about some of the, you talked about African American but LGBTQ history and all these heritage aspects in Toronto, for example. There are neighborhoods that were seminal in the in gay rights, for example, that might not be recognized according to the new standards. So yes, I don't know, I would want to make that generic. I tried to avoid saying Grimsby other than just the town of Grimsby, but I wanted to make it something that related to everybody, so I said Grimsby and Ontario municipalities. So I think, yes, I can definitely add a paragraph about national heritage and Indigenous heritage, and I'll bring that forward for sure. Yeah, I think that's a great addition. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so if you can explain how this is going to work.
I was, through the chair, I just put something together to cover Councillor Cristandi's thoughts, just so that we have an actual amended document that we can pass, that you endorse tonight. Okay. So that way you can move forward. So I'm just finishing it up, but I was going to add a line that says, whereas the new requirement does not allow for the municipality to further assess our nationally significant resources, more specifically resources connected to the War of 1812, Indigenous, I could say Indigenous communities. Communities and culture. people of color. And there was another one.
There was LGBTQ as well. There was a list of about half a dozen in that original article. I think that summarizes our concerns, so.
Okay, I could say something like, and our community's commitment to ensuring like the preservation of all, yeah.
Inclusive heritage, yeah, that's good.
Oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. What did I say? Our community's commitment.
And Ms. Fichika is going to explain the process while that's being drafted.
Through the chair, so what we're going to do first is just pass a motion that the committee receives the proposed notice of motion just as is. And then afterwards, what we'll do is we'll have you pass a motion to endorse the notice of motion with the modified changes discussed during new business.
Does that work for everybody? Okay, so I need a mover and a seconder to accept the notice of motion. Councilor Korstanji, seconded by Riley. Resolved that the Heritage Grimsby Advisory Committee receive Councilor DeFlavio's proposed notice of motion for council consideration with regards to the listed properties in Municipal Heritage Register. All in favor? That's carried.
Bianca wrote this one. It's all over the place, but you kind of have to go motion regarding changes.
Yeah, no problem.
Apologies.
It's okay, I've marked lots of essays, I know what the arrows mean. Do we want to read what you? You should get some pencils in here so you don't have to scratch everything out all the time.
Okay, so the two edits I have is that we're changing the statement, be it further resolved that this council of the town of Grimsby encourages the government of the province of Ontario to make changes to the Ontario Heritage Act, which promote the retention and expansion of the Municipal Heritage Register, including the listing of properties of cultural heritage value or interest that are not currently designated. So that's the one change.
So there's, and you can change Bill 23 in the next paragraph to Ontario Heritage Act as well. You don't need to read that,
Yeah.
just.
Okay, and then the big one is, whereas the new requirements do not allow the municipality to further assess our naturally significant resources, more specifically, resources connected to the War of 1812, our Indigenous communities and culture, people of color, LGBTQ+ communities, and impacting our community's commitment to ensuring preservation of all of our, preservation of our inclusive history.
Okay, I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councilor Korstanji, seconded by Member Nixon. Resolved that the Heritage Grimsby Advisory Committee endorses the notice of motion regarding changes to the Municipal Heritage Register with the modified changes discussed during new business. All in favor? That's carried. Thanks for your help, everybody. That's exactly what I wanted to come from this process, was those changes that you mentioned there. Is there any other new business? Seeing none? Oh, sorry. Member Riley?
Through you, Chair. I don't know if it qualifies as new business, but just a question for town staff around applications. If there's going to be applications for the committee, the existing members, then I know we have room for expanding to 2 more. And then also just wanted to clarify meeting dates as we're going to 4. I think this was an unplanned meeting, so it would be 3 months from last month. So just around applications and timing of next meeting.
Through the chair, if you don't mind. We're going to be holding a committee open house, a board and committee open house on February 15th. We are going to be advertising for that early next week as well. So you can come up to the open house and get an idea of which committees are you might be interested in. I know obviously you guys are interested in heritage, of course, but any other questions you may have, and then the applications to become a member for this term of council will be available as well. And that'll be, sorry, I should let you know, is from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. on February 15th.
So that's, I'm sure Mayor Jordan is going to mention it on Monday, but the open house is for all committees. So just, we want as many people to come forward and apply as possible. Does that answer your question, Member Riley?
Yes, thank you. And then just a question on next meeting. I think we're going to 4 a year again, and is that going to be April? Is that going to be May?
Or as required? Ms. Vareka?
Through you, the chair, originally our plan was 4 meetings a year with working groups, but with the Bill 23 changes, it looks like we're going to be having a meeting every month. We have some ambitious goals for designation, so we'd like to keep this moving forward. And if we continue with the earlier meeting times, we can do the working groups after, like we did a few times. So, but yeah, likely there'll be a March meeting. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any other items of new business? Do we need a motion to adjourn, or can we just adjourn? Okay, the meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.